Okay. Question 7. Should non-whites be encouraged to have white kids with screened white donor eggs and white sperm? So would this be feasible for parliamentarians like Francis Saif al-Basir and I don't know who this person is, non-white parliamentarians in the West who acknowledges the ethocentric long-term view in general? What is your view on this?
Ethnocentric. We have 3 answers to this already. Oh, mine was once again can't give a universal answer. I obviously have my views on this, the ones stated in the previous answer, outbreeding, depression, and all that. On the other hand, it's hard to argue for depriving those that demonstrate investment into changing the situation in the right direction of this choice. And it's certainly not my preference to go beyond Nuremberg laws and start breaking up existing marriages and families. We're beyond any chance of achieving total purity, though in general, the rate of intermixing is nowhere near as bad as some doomers think. Francis, next one is yours.
Yeah, I said my answer is pretty straightforward. Well, so I'm already married. I have daughters, and I just want them to find husbands with equal higher IQ in comparable social economic class and have lots of kids. So I prefer them to find European husbands, since I do believe the Europeans possess an optimal level of neoteny. Although this is probably covered by my recent readings of Richard Lin, I'm more concerned about dysgenics, right? The
Yes.
less births from
Yeah.
groups with higher IQs than I am about what race they're from.
Yes. Correct. I have the same
The
opinion.
race is really just for me is more of a it's a heuristic based selection criteria. If I know the IQ, average IQ from each racial group, then without knowing this person further, I can make a rough guess of what their IQ and social economic class is. Although, I've worked with some very talented, very smart uh, people of African descent. There's,
Mhm.
I think he's probably now a technical fellow dude at Microsoft, and he's black, and he's way smarter than I am.
Mhm.
Yeah, but at that point, you really have to worry about outbreeding depression, because that's like the most distant population.
I'm sorry, what it is?
He's saying that the difference between Asians and Europeans were both highly neotenous.
Oh, I see.
It's
I
very
just
small.
mean that we're far more related than we are to Africans.
Yes. And so the problem is, so this is one of the things that is dirty, the dirty subject is that you would really like to maintain breeding pools on the size of 1,500 or 3,000 people. All right, because that's where you get the maximum error correction. But when you start mixing gene pools, that's where you don't get error correction. And so, and if you look at this, it's not only in the mutation, it's basically the reproductive issue. So you see really weird, this is just beginning to come out, right? So we have to be careful. You start seeing very strange effects happen in hybridized populations.
Mm.
Overall, you go to the median of the IQ, right? Which is why what's the difference between Europeans and East Asians? It's a couple of points, right? Right, but what's the difference between Europeans and South Eurasians? Well, it's a fucking
15,
standard,
roughly.
right? What's the difference
Yeah.
between South Eurasians and Africans? It's a fucking standard deviation. I mean,
It's the same as between wolves and coyotes.
yeah, I mean, it's a huge difference. So I mean, so that's just one difference. And of course, we are constructed roughly of the past 6 generations, right? That's what determines most about us is the past 6 to 8 generations. After that, it starts getting nullified by all the competition. So when you look at this, I would say, well, if I don't, the most important thing is I'm going to go with France. I have the same opinion, which is, are you in a gene pool that has the proper attributes to maintain this high trust, highly innovative social order, society or not? And if you're not, then that's not good. Unfortunately, that's what we've been doing. We've been importing those people.
So Curt, before we move on, I have a question there. So when you said we start seeing weird issue in hybridized population, is it? I remember you mentioned this before, and I thought about it, and I thought I understood the issue there. Is it because whereas hybridized population used to be very rare, with globalization it's becoming more common, and so let's say that a rare disease due to hybridization is 1 in a million. When you only have thousands of unions, it may not show up. But now, then, if you have say 10 million of such, it's a
let's not take disease, because the one I notice is upstairs. And so what's happening is we have enough data now to begin to see these things. And we don't have enough certainty over what each segment of the DNA is doing in practice to be able to understand how what evocations and collisions are happening.
Right.
But what we do see is we see certain mental instabilities occurring, in mental differences happening, and they don't appear to be very good. And then it's also hard to correct the phenotype. And how can I say this without being unkind? But there are parts of the world where there's so much genetic collision that nobody's very good looking. We won't mention any, although I have been to many of them, and it's kind of surprising, right? So what you want is actually, you can't, it's very, natural selection starts having a problem. So I'm like I said, I follow this stuff every day, right? So I'm watching what's happening, and I'm seeing the differences, and you can see the pattern emerging, but it's not at the point where anybody feels comfortable talking about it too openly, even though it's starting to become relatively, it's like everything else, right? We couldn't talk about IQ, we then we couldn't. We couldn't talk about sex differences, and then that was solved. We couldn't talk about class differences, and then that was solved. We couldn't talk about race differences, and that was solved. And there's just a lag between this data being discovered and people's tolerance for it as it works out. And I think it's like everything else. The profs have to die off, right? You have to, the generation, the science progresses with tombstones. So just in my lifetime, I've been surprised. I mean, what's changed.
Gabriel, you want to talk? Oh, sorry, Martin. Go ahead.
I wanted to add my explanation of outbreeding depression because I don't think it was sufficiently clear. It's just if the two populations have evolved separately for thousands or tens of thousands of years, basically the genes interact only together, and the errors their combinations produce get selected out. Whereas when you start to hybridize, those combinations are entirely new and may have various negative effects that up to this point haven't been selected against. So yes, we see in the data that there are various mental disorders, and there's also the issue that hybrids find it practically impossible to find organ donors when something happens.
So the net result is, so I'm trying to, now the opposition is going to say, well, why do you guys care? I'm like, well, because some of us care about the consequences. The question is, why don't you care, right? Why don't you care about the consequences? I'm not hurting anybody. In fact, you are.
You're hurting the genetic capital of the population.
Or as one of the people in Telegram chat says, do not piss in the gene pool.
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah.
And which is,
You're not hurting anybody, you're hurting everybody.
I've sort of experimented widely, if that's the right thing, and stereotypes tend to be pretty true, but It's just easier. It's easier when your groups are developmentally closer than if they're far apart.
Gabriel, do you want to read your answer? I guess it's pretty similar.
Yeah, it is. I'll read it anyway. Again, this is a question of whether or not we want to bear the cost as a group. As I see it, the bottom line is that non-whites benefit while the white host tries to minimize the cost. All while the white fertility rate is already catastrophic. My preference would be to steward other races' ascent into sufficient prosperity so that they don't feel the push to leave their nations, consume our capital, and leave their own behind. Basically, that's it.
Correct. So how would the audience, what do we tell the audience about what we're saying here? Because these questions are similar, is that we do what's called full accounting, right? So when we ask for a question, we don't say, oh, we like this, or I would prefer this. We try to find the limit, right? The very end point, whatever is determining the outcome, and that produces decidability. So what we're saying is, we're fully accounting for inputs and outputs or consequences. And so when we look at these things, that's what we're doing. We're saying, well, I mean, in the end, data is data, fact is fact. These things are difficult.